Let's get started today. Um, Thanks again for joining us for Inclusive Performance Reviews, a path to fair and equitable feedback. Because we're located in Canada and because of Truth and Reconciliation, we like to start our webinars off with a land acknowledgement. So even though we're meeting today through the modern marvel of the internet, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 nations in southern Alberta. So here in Calgary, also known as Mohkinstsis to the Blackfoot, it is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. But who am I? My name is Zakeana Reid, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Diversio EDU, formerly CCDI Consulting, which was acquired by Diversio this past May. I've had the privilege of working in human resources for over 20 years, managing the full employee life cycle from recruitment, training, development, to performance management, and even terminations. And throughout my career, I've been fortunate to design and implement programs that support these critical employment systems. For the past 15 years, though, I've really moved into more management and leadership roles, which has given me a broader perspective on how to apply HR principles to real-world settings, which has allowed me to move beyond HR theory that I was taught and focus on practical solutions that make a tangible impact in the workplace. Today, I am joined by my colleague and friend, Matteo Stewart. Matteo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Cheers. Thank you so much, Zakeana. It's an absolute honor to hold space with you and with the over 160 folks here on the call today. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I've got a little bit of my background here, although I've given 3 international TEDx talks. I don't want this to be a TED Talk. I really want this to be a great, robust conversation talking about inclusive performance management. I've worked in many different industries, from healthcare, where I have my clinical specialties in internal medicine and emergency medicine, but I've also worked in private equity. I've worked in several Olympic and Paralympic and World Cups. I've also taught academically, both here in Canada, the US, taught first-year medicine at Waseda University in Tokyo. That said, for me, any day that I get to spend a time talking about inclusion, for me, as someone who is battling cancer, it is just an absolute honor and pleasure, and wonderful to see so many wonderful folks. And I'll be in the chat and also be contributing as well. So big cheers, everyone. And thank you for inviting me, Zakeana.
Thanks for joining me. It makes it so much more fun to present with a friend. So during this hour, I'm excited to share with you some practical strategies to improve your performance review processes, helping you to create a more inclusive and equitable workplace. So whether you're just starting out in the performance management space or whether you have a solid, robust system, I hope that these insights will provide you with actionable steps on your journey towards fairer and more effective performance management and evaluations. So performance reviews are really a cornerstone for employees around career advancement and development within an organization, but they often fall short for those equity-deserving groups and leave many employees feeling overlooked and undervalued. So one key to successful performance management is ensuring that the managers and leaders can clearly articulate what needs to be done, while also allowing employees the autonomy to determine how to accomplish these tasks. This balance fosters a sense of ownership and accountability in employees and promotes psychological safety. So let's break down the 3 core steps. First, managers need to thoughtfully consider what they aim to achieve with performance management. So that includes understanding the business needs, the employee's role, and how performance is going to be evaluated. So the proper planning sets the stage for the success in the end. After planning, you have to establish those SMART goals. Are they specific? Can you measure them? Can the employee actually achieve them? Are they relevant to the overarching business plans and strategies that you have set out? And do you have time boundaries around them? Those clear goals allow both managers and employees to be aligned on what success looks like and how to get there. And then once the goals are set, they have to be communicated clearly. So effective communication reduces the ambiguity and ensures that employees understand not only what's expected, but how they're going to be evaluated. And that transparency is vital for creating a sense of trust, as well as an equitable and inclusive review process. But some days, people have asked, why do we even do these? They take so much time for the managers creating them, and employees dread them. But they serve a vital purpose, which is providing structured feedback and ensuring employees are aligned with the organizational's goals and recognizing their contributions to the team. Now, I'm going to toss a word out here that's going to cause some feelings. So I want to talk about meritocracy, because meritocracy is often seen as the hallmark of fairness. But when an organization labels itself as a meritocracy, it can lead to complacency around bias. And the belief actually ends up creating a paradox. By claiming to operate solely on merit, it fosters this complacency. And even the most well-intentioned systems unintentionally then allow bias to influence decisions if it's left unchecked and unexamined. So biases can infiltrate performance reviews at 3 different levels in an organization. We look at the institutional level. So these are your written and your unwritten rules. It's how stuff gets done. And these systems create the frameworks for behavior within your organization. And biases can become embedded in these formal processes like hiring, promotions, evaluations, as well as in less tangible culture that governs your day-to-day interactions, which leads us into the group bias. So this occurs when collective assumptions, those norms, around marginalized individuals who don't conform to those collective assumptions, what you've determined as the standards within an organization. We're going to look at where those show up in an organization as well. Finally, we have the individual bias. So this occurs when our personal stereotypes impact evaluations. So our subjective perceptions skew our judgment, which can lead to unfair assessments based on unfounded assumptions about someone's capability or character. And the way this shows up can be in multiple, visible and invisible, but it often shows up in the quality of the feedback being given. So for example, women and people of color often receive less or vague feedback, which limits their ability to grow professionally. Throughout today's presentation, I'm going to offer some strategies to address bias at each of these levels, starting with the institutional framework. And Matteo's going to talk to you a little bit about the research on feedback given and how that impacts employees' experience of the workplace. So to address institutional and organizational levels of bias, I would invite you to consider reviewing your employment systems. Granted, I'm coming at this from a lens of the work I've done around employment equity, but it always struck me as so relevant to any organization as part of a regular review process. So systems review examines both unwritten and written rules of employment systems, exploring how the formal and informal norms interact to shape organizational culture, employee experiences, and overall inclusivity. So it involves analyzing your documented policies, procedures, as well as looking at how that plays out in the workplace. We are striving to identify the underlying assumptions that lead to the behaviors and that influence decision making. So by highlighting how these elements promote or hinder fairness within the organization, the review can help you identify areas for improvement and help your organization align the systems towards your inclusion goals. So there's a couple of quick questions for you, and this can be applied really to any system, but I've framed it in the terms of performance management for the purposes of today's session. So to guide your review, consider the following questions. Is your performance review process documented and transparent? So is there somewhere where employees and managers both can go to read what is written and to see if they understand what's expected both of them and of the others involved in the process? Is it accessible? It's great to draft policies. In one systems review I did, I had a company who said, absolutely, everyone can access it. It's in a binder in the HR floor, which needed secure access to get to. Nowadays, I know most organizations have an intranet, but if you don't tell people it's there, they may not know to go look for it. So make sure it's accessible to people as well as accessible in multiple formats in case you have employees who may need to review it in a different way. Are managers and employees regularly trained? I know that when you rolled out the brand new process, you did a massive training across the entire organization. Everybody went through it. But are you redoing it as people change roles? Are you redoing it annually to make sure that new managers know what's expected of them? Especially if you aren't doing performance review, if it's not a regular process or it might change throughout the year. So making sure that you're providing regular training on the process to keep people up to date and know what is expected of them. Is it reviewed against existing legislation? I know that in the UK, we've got new sexual harassment legislation coming out this October. In Canada, in Alberta, we went through a massive overhaul of our employment standards a few years back. And the US is regularly rolling out both statewide and federal changes to legislation? And are you looking at your systems in that context on a relatively regular basis? Additionally, are you looking at it against current best practices versus previous best practices to make sure you're kind of keeping up to date with what's new and exciting in the world of performance management, both around technology and around just how things get done? Finally, is it applied consistently across the organization? So it's great to have something written, but if that's not the actual way it shows up, that could be a problem for folks. Are there consequences if it's not followed consistently? So are you documenting when it's not happening, why it's not happening consistently, and providing feedback and guidance to get it back on track? Another element to consider is are accommodations being thought of? And oftentimes we think of accommodations for some reason, and this might be my personal take. I hear accommodations, I picture a wheelchair, I think about physical accessibility, and that's not even the case these days. We need to think about, are there ways that people could interpret this? Do you have employees where in your organization for whom English is not a first language? Do you have employees who may be neurodiverse? I mean, we're all neurodiverse. Neurodivergent from common norms, the norms up to this point, and could there be ways that we could make these more accessible to these individuals? So just contemplating how this might play out for different individuals. New employees could interpret these systems differently than employees who've been with the organization for multiple years. What about in Matteo, in my case, we've just been acquired by a company. So we have norms in our organization. How does that play out in the new organization? All of these things, what are the ways that you can make this as accommodating to as many people as possible? So just some things for you to consider. So I wanted to double click down on one of those things I mentioned about best practices. So I want to acknowledge, having implemented a performance management system, that it is a heavy lift to design and then roll this out. So when we consider institutional and organizational bias, we need to look at the frequency that we look at our systems because of that heavy lift. Often these systems have pretty long lives in organizations, and that extended duration can lead to an over-reliance on older or outdated best practices, which is why we recommend that you look at it relatively regularly. So those outdated practices may not address today's diverse workforce needs. So what I'm talking about here is in the past, there were highly structured annual written formal reviews. Often there was a ranking involved, forced ranking, managers being asked to, from your best to your worst, rank them. And the focus was primarily on evaluation, and the tools were being used for discipline or dismissal. And those approaches typically emphasized identification of weaknesses rather than fostering growth. And often what resulted was a culture of fear and a sense of defensiveness among employees. So moving towards more modern best practices, these are focused a little bit more on that continuous feedback model. However, I want to draw a slight distinction here. Continuous feedback, it's great to have your one-on-ones, but continuous feedback in the context of ensuring documentation of continuous feedback. So providing that feedback is fantastic if it's in a verbal form, and then you only do that annual written review. It makes it very hard to look back and consider the entire year of the accomplishments and the shortcomings that an employee may have actually addressed successfully. So documenting those in kind of regular chunks. It could be quarterly. It doesn't have to be, every one-on-one, but making sure that you're doing some sort of formal continuous feedback that you can then refer to later. So some of the key elements that the more modern best practices address, you see a lot of the underlying principles of psychological safety. So fostering an environment that has clear expectations, open communication, encouraging employees to take risks without fear of punitive repercussions. You also see employees being allowed that flexibility, the how they want to achieve those goals, which increases engagement and aligns with the trend towards workplace empowerment. And that regular review ensures ongoing alignment. So it's pretty easy to bring an employee back when you catch some behavior that's not quite what you need, and you only need to provide a little bit of coaching to get them back on track. But if they keep on that lane for too long, it becomes significantly harder to reroute them back where they need to go. So that ongoing alignment, it also helps you address any organizational goals and shifts that may need to come up. For example, I created a business plan at the beginning of 2024, but with the acquisition, both CCDI's business plan and Diversio's business plan needed to change. And that meant we needed to recommunicate with a lot of employees what was expected of them for the rest of the year. And many organizations go through similar experiences where something that may have seemed important at the beginning suddenly shifts due to unforeseen circumstances. The pandemic was another great one that showed us how what we identified at the beginning of the year may need to shift, and having those regular conversations helps with that. The other big change that you notice is current modern processes are around employee development, supporting growth through feedback loops, and encouraging continuous performance, skill development, And that helps organizations retain that top talent. So if I could provide you with a small suggestion, you don't have to do all of your systems all at one time. One small suggestion that helped me over the course of years when I was responsible for looking at employment systems within organizations as part of an employment equity framework was chunking it out into quarters. And I actually broke all of our systems down over a 2-year period. So recruitment, for example, year one, quarter one, and then I moved on to comp and benefits, and then Q3, promotion systems, performance management, and you can chunk it out a little bit so that you're not doing everything all at once. Another suggestion, use your diversity councils, your diversity committees, your ERGs. Get those inclusive lenses, looking at what you do and how you do it. It can be invaluable, and that doesn't leave everything on the manager and the HR business partner to deliver it all. So, one of the fantastic examples that we have that Matteo's going to really dig down into is around vague versus actionable criteria. But I want to link this to that group level of bias, because even if you look at your systems at the group level, you still have biases that could arise in the way organizational values are defined and communicated. So frequently, organizations have values like collaboration or leadership, and they're expressed in vague terms, which allows for very subjective interpretations, and that may perpetuate bias in your organization. So to mitigate this group bias, if you can establish clear and objective definition to these values and behaviors by specifying exactly what collaboration means, such as engages in joint problem-solving activities, offers constructive feedback, leverages team members' strengths to achieve project outcomes. In that way, organizations can help foster a more inclusive environment. This clarity not only reduces subjectivity in performance evaluations, but ensures that all employees are assessed fairly, regardless of their backgrounds. And I know, because of my experience both creating the systems and conducting systems review, that so much effort has already gone into defining these values and writing these statements. But I want to invite you to consider some of the ways that we may be able to provide a little bit more clarity around this. So, let's look at teamwork, works well with others. How many people have something like that in your organizational values, or have worked with a company that had something like that? Adaptability, is flexible, responds positively to change, creativity, ideates innovative solutions. It doesn't really give you anything to tell you, what does that mean? What am I as a person supposed to do to tell you that I did that when I'm doing my self-evaluation? So what could we do? Here is a suggestion that we created to help you with this. So one example for teamwork, you could have something like actively contributes to team goals by participating in team meetings and completing assigned tasks on time. That way I can say, okay, I participated in 95% of the meetings, and the 3 meetings I missed was because I was facilitating a session or I was off sick or whatever, right? So you can actually put metrics to some of these. And that really helps with the subjectivity if you can measure it in some way. Adaptability. What about demonstrates willingness to adjust plans based on feedback? So this is where you, having documented that you had a conversation with folks to say, I want to get you back on track, you will be able to go back and look at, when I gave feedback, they demonstrated a willingness, they adjusted the behavior, and we had success moving forward. You can actually measure that. Implements new processes with minimal disruption. We're always going to have folks who grumble about things that are changing, but ultimately, are they able to get over it and are they able to successfully implement changes as they're being brought up? Change is our only constant. Let's look at creativity. So, here's an example. Obviously, each organization is going to have something different, but what about generates at least, for example, three alternates for challenges? Oftentimes, teams get together to talk about issues that they're facing in the organization. It's great if you can raise the issues, but who's really contributing to solving those issues? And then you could say something like implements at least one innovative idea each quarter. So that could be in relation to the challenges being faced, or it could be a suggestion that they brought up as a way to improve, to save money, any of those types of things. Just something you can show that has a start, a finish, a finite, defined outcome to it. So those are the ways that I would recommend we look at how to tackle biases at the institution level and down into that group level. But what I want to do is hand things over to Matteo now to share a bit about the research on performance feedback.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Zakeana. And yes, to your point, leaders, I mean, having great intentions or good intentions clearly isn't enough, especially when we look at what the data is telling us. And what's, clear and a lot of information here on the slide around, how studies are indicating that the greater the differences in diversity dimensions, such as gender and race between a manager and employee, the more pronounced these biases have become, leading to less constructive and unfortunately more critical feedback. For example, McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report highlighted that women, especially racialized women and women of color, often receive less actionable feedback and are judged more harshly compared to their male counterparts. And when we delve into more of the data and what the data is telling us, for especially around actionable feedback, women, especially racialized women and women of color, frequently receive feedback that is considered to be less actionable. 88% of women receive feedback based on personality traits versus actual specific behavior, compared, of course, to only 12% of men. But this vagueness can really hinder career progression, as personality-based feedback is really very rarely ever actionable. Like, what's the now what there? 76% of top achieving women receive negative feedback from their bosses, compared to just 2% of high achieving men. For every 1,000 words in performance reviews, women experience twice as many instances of poor quality critiques compared to men. In this context, what the researchers were looking at, poor quality critiques typically refers to vague, unconstructive, or overly negative feedback that really fails to provide actionable insights to improvement. Women, particularly those in leadership roles or traditionally male-dominated industries, often face personal and character-based criticisms or feedback rather than evaluations based on skills and contributions. And what we know from the data is this can be detrimental to their career advancement. The report also notes that 22% of racialized women receive fewer than 2 performance evaluations a year compared to 12% of white women. And this disparity indicates that employees from racialized groups, including Black and Latinx individuals, often do not receive the necessary feedback to support the professional growth, which is, of course, the whole reason why we do performance reviews. Supporting and building on that report, research conducted by Textio found that Black men receive nearly 9 times more non-actionable feedback compared to white men under 40. And what this statistic underscores is the challenges faced by racialized employees in obtaining useful insights from their performance reviews. Feedback for the 2S LGBTQI plus employees, the Stonewall report from the UK indicated that 2S LGBTQI plus employees frequently encounter bias in performance evaluations, particularly in environments lacking inclusive policies. They also reported receiving, again, vague feedback tied to stereotypes, such as, things like being too flamboyant or needing to look more professional. But again, what is professional? When we think about this, what is the impact of this on the individuals and the organization. And let's now examine the ramifications of really failing to address the biases and ensuring clarity and feedback. When we look at the organizational impact, there's such vague or such an impact of these vague and biased feedback. When employees receive vague or biased feedback, the consequences, I mean, we know, ripple throughout the organization, from stalled career progression, confidence erosion, perceptions of unfairness. But when we dive into the actual organizational impact, things that come up: reduced innovation and creativity. Employees who receive vague or biased feedback, they might be hesitant to take risk or think outside the box. If they feel that their contributions aren't recognized or that they will be judged unfairly, they're going to be less likely to engage in creative problem solving. Research also indicates that environments lacking this psychological safety, where employees don't feel safe or take risks to speak up, result in reduced innovation and stagnation. Higher employee turnover. Gallup, for example, has found that disengaged employees are twice as likely to leave their jobs within a year compared to those receiving constructive feedback. Additionally, turnover among women and racialized individuals tends to increase in environments where feedback is inconsistent or biased. We see decreased productivity and performance. Employees receiving vague or non-actionable feedback may struggle to understand, how they can improve, again, leading to decreased productivity over time. A Harvard Business Review study found that employees lacking clear, actionable feedback are 23% less likely to meet their performance goals. Lower employee morale and engagement based on vague feedback and contributions to a perception of unfairness, which can quickly erode employee morale. Those who feel that they aren't evaluated fairly or overlooked for development opportunities, we know, will be less motivated, leading to lower engagement. McKinsey research indicated that employees who perceive bias in performance evaluations are more likely to disengage, resulting in decreased commitment and job satisfaction. And then what happens to the pipeline, impaired leadership pipeline, when equity deserving groups consistently are receiving what they consider vague feedback? Well, they're less likely to be seen as ready for the leadership roles. And again, this creates an imbalanced leadership pipeline where underrepresented groups are excluded from promotions. According to the Center for Talent and Innovation, companies with less diverse leadership tend to have lower levels of employee engagement, innovation, and performance. And certainly last but not least, worsened organizational reputation. Companies known for providing vague or biased feedback, particularly to underrepresented groups, risk damaging their reputation as employers. And in today's competitive talent market, that just can't happen. Employer branding, of course, is critical. Employees often share their experiences on public platforms like Glassdoor and LinkedIn, and organizations perceived as biased in the performance review process may struggle to attract top talent, especially from diverse backgrounds, resulting in a weaker talent pool over time. And so let's now take a look at ways that we can move from personality-based feedback, again, to more actionable based feedback. So we've got some examples here. You're annoying, you're disorganized, or you're always late. And people often use these "you are" statements in feedback because they find it simple and direct to express their thoughts. Some statements also convey an emotional response, making feedback, unfortunately, feel more personal. However, these statements can lead to defensiveness and vague feedback, making it harder for individuals to identify what do they need to do specifically, those specific areas for improvement. Shifting to behavior-focused language is generally more constructive, helping to clarify expectations and growth. Similar, using superlatives such as "you always" or "you never" in performance management can really negatively impact employee perception of fairness, increases defensiveness, diminishes motivation, strains that manager-employee relationship. And often these statements this generalized feedback, making it so vague and so unhelpful, will hinder that employee's ability to identify what they actually need to do for improvement. So if we can take a look at some of the examples of what we're talking about here, moving from "you are annoying," what we can do here, if we just click, a great example. Last week I heard you interrupt, being very specific, and what was the impact? Here's what you did. describe the behavior without adding any additional things to it. And then what was the impact, which disrupted the flow of discussion? And then the now what, right? What we're encouraging is let's work towards allowing others to finish their thoughts before responding. And if we can take a look at the next one, right? I noticed last month that you missed a deadline and didn't complete, insert whatever they didn't complete, and then involving them, right? Let's work together on a planning system that can keep track of tasks. And this last one, converting, you are always late. Be specific, on 3 occasions since, whenever you've arrived late for, your sessions or your meetings. Would it help if we scheduled them at a different time? Again, now involving that individual in whatever the now what could be. So just again, some additional strategies for effective feedback. Focus on the specific behavior and the impact that they had on the team, on others, instead of just making a general statement. Be specific about the exact behavior that needs addressing. We also recommend using I statements. Frame your observations with I statements to express how the behavior impacts the team or project. I feel that meeting could be more productive if everyone shares their ideas without interruptions. The other one too is encouraging a two-way dialogue. After providing feedback, invite the recipient to share their perspective. And we encourage this because this creates an open environment for discussion and can lead to collaborative problem solving, suggesting, of course, solutions or alternatives when pointing out an area for improvement, and balance the negative with positive feedback. Ensure that constructive criticism is balanced with acknowledgments of their strengths and contributions to really, again, help focus on motivation and morale. Now that we've looked at personality-based feedback, I'd like to move on looking at that vague and unactionable that many folks lean on to really flesh out their constructive feedback, which might be perceived as positive feedback. So things like, you need to be more assertive. Why this is vague, of course, this comment provides no specific examples or guidance on how to be assertive in a productive way. Without context, it leaves the individual guessing, right? They now have to interpret. Actionable feedback, in the client meeting, take the lead on the negotiation. Be clear about our position on pricing and don't be afraid to challenge their first offer. Why this is actionable? Again, it gives us very specific task and clear instructions on what to do, offering practical advice that can be applied immediately. Incorporate more data in presentations. Again, that's great. Why it's vague, this doesn't provide any insights into exactly what the employee is doing well or where they can improve without specifics. So saying things like your presentation skills are solid, next time try incorporating more data to back up your points. Use, whatever it might be for reference. And this will strengthen your, why this is actionable. The feedback is, again, more specific about what the employee did well, and provides clear steps for improvement. Again, how we can use data in a very particular, and from a particular source. You're doing fine, but could be more proactive. Again, that's so vague. This doesn't explain what proactive means. That can be interpreted so many different ways, especially in the context of an employee's role. It also ignores any accommodations the employee might need to even meet that expectation. So for actionable feedback, I love this example here. For the next project, try to anticipate potential issues with the timeline by flagging delays as early as possible. If there's anything that could help with this, like tools or resources, let's discuss. But again, this feedback clearly defines what being proactive looks like, being specific, flagging delays early, and open the door to discussing, what help that individual might need in order to achieve what you're hoping, that behavioral change that you're hoping for. Cheers. I'm going to pass it over to you, Zakeana, now. Cheers.
Thanks so much for walking us through some of that research and really how to practically change some of those vague, I know I've done it, to say, I need you to be more proactive. And just hearing what you had to say, I'm going to have to do a better job of defining what I mean by proactive. So I want to bring up something that most folks don't consider now that we've looked at institutional, group, and individual biases. Every person, every employee that you meet with for their performance review is also going to bring a backpack full of their own biases into a conversation. So I thought I'd take a bit of time to give you a few to be aware of and ways that you may be able to mitigate their impact on your performance review to keep it from going sideways. So research shows that employees are more likely to remember and internalize negative feedback over positive feedback due to negativity bias. So this is the psychological phenomenon where negative experiences or comments have a greater impact on one's perception than positive ones. It's also part of the reason why we talk about when you do your feedback sandwich, having multiple examples of positive for each corrective behavior that you have. According to studies published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, employees often fixate on that criticism, and that then impacts self-esteem, and it could impact future performance. So to mitigate this, what you can do and what the managers in your organizations can focus on is framing feedback constructively. Again, going back to how we want to focus on the future and how we want to help you grow. The next one is that confirmation bias. So employees may unconsciously filter new feedback through the lens of past experience. So if an employee had previously received negative reviews, regardless of what is happening in this current session, they may be expecting future feedback to be critical, and therefore they may interpret neutral or positive comments through a negative lens. Then you have the primacy effect, the initial feedback carrying more weight. So if they're looking back at the negative feedback, that is going to carry more weight than the current feedback. That's the primacy. It also plays a role in how employees approach all subsequent reviews. That goes into that backpack of employee experience, and they're going to drag that into every scenario moving forward. Managers can combat these biases by being consistent in providing feedback. So that's that regular feedback throughout the year, and ensuring that reviews are balanced, objective, and behavior focused, avoiding generalizations. Once again, going back to what Matteo said, like you always and you never, which tends to make people defensive. Stereotype threat. So employees from equity deserving groups, such as women and racialized individuals, may experience something called stereotype threat, which impacts how they process feedback. So this occurs when individuals fear being judged or treated according to negative stereotypes about their group. So a study in the American Psychology Association found that when employees anticipate biased or stereotyped feedback, they're less likely to view any feedback as constructive. To mitigate this, managers should be aware of their own biases and ensure that performance criteria are once again specific and grounded in observable behaviors rather than those subjective traits. And this approach can help alleviate some of the effects of stereotype threat that create a more inclusive environment for receiving feedback. So, just a couple of ways that you can help set that stage is encourage employees to approach feedback with a growth mindset. Help them understand that the feedback is a tool for development so that they can start viewing constructive criticism as an opportunity rather than a personal attack. And you can help set this tone by emphasizing feedback is future focused. It's about improving in the future. It's not about dwelling on past behavior. Balancing negative and positive feedback, that feedback sandwich. So because employees latch on to the negative, even if it's delivered alongside praise, often you need more praise than negative in order to help offset that. Feedback as dialogue, not a verdict. So if we can shift that mindset around performance reviews away from being a one-sided evaluation, those more traditional views of performance management to a two-way dialogue by you as the manager actively engaging in conversation with employees. What do you think? Here's what I've observed. When employees feel involved in the conversation, they're less likely to view feedback through the lens of their past negative experiences and more likely to see it as a constructive conversation about future goals. So, I just want to summarize a kind of what you can do to help have a successful meeting with employees. So, when managers are faced with employee biases, despite your best intentions, you still might need to coach yourself through a situation, and that's going to require a bit of self-awareness on your part. It's all fine and dandy to pull out self-awareness to your employees, but you also need to take a step back and go, okay, what am I bringing? What from my backpack am I unloading on this employee? So we want to acknowledge the reality of employee bias, just as each of us have our own biases. Just acknowledging that their experience of performance from across the table is going to be different than yours the experience on one side of the table is different than the other. So recognize this without taking it personally, and focus on keeping the review process objective and constructive. When things start to go sideways, if an employee starts reacting negatively or defensively, you may need to give some space, but you can also come back to that objective performance data, those measurable outcomes, those specific examples, and that can help minimize the perception of subjective opinions. Dealing with employees and dealing with biases requires patience and empathy. Try to understand that their experience with you is not their only experience of performance, criticism, critique, feedback in their lives, that they'll probably have a parental, a sports, a public school, high school, college, all of those ways that they've received feedback in the past is going to come into play here. Look at your communication style. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's why we focused a little bit on shifting some of the language around you are statements to I observe or I've seen or I've heard, something that can be objectively viewed by others. So look at ways that your communication style may be impacting the relationship. And the most important thing, obviously, once you set those expectations, you need to follow through on them. So if you promise to have regular feedback, if you've promised to have regular discussions, ensure that you're consistently meeting your part of that performance feedback process. And that reduces the risk of employees assuming that it's always about what they're doing wrong. So, in summary, it's important to remember that creating inclusive performance reviews isn't an all or nothing process. I've given you, and Matteo has provided, a lot of different ways that you can address biases at 3 different levels. Institutional, by conducting systems reviews to ensure equitable processes. Group, by implementing objective performance criteria. And individual, through self-reflection, training, obviously, for both managers and employees on the policies, the processes, and on the impact of biases within these, as well as behavior-focused feedback. This holistic approach not only fosters inclusion, but delivers measurable business outcomes from improved employee engagement, which can help lead to higher retention and productivity. Regardless of where you or your organization are on your journey towards inclusion, I hope that today's presentation has given you at least one idea that you can take away and implement. And don't feel like you have to do it all at once. Start with one small thing that resonates with you and your organization and fits with what you're already doing, and begin from there. I am thrilled that we have time now to open things
Hmm.
up. Part of these webinars is about hearing from you, the participants, and we want to hear any questions you might have and pop those into the chat, raise your hand, and I would love to hear what folks think, what you have to say, and anything that anything anything that
Zakeana,
you want to bring up. Yeah.
there's some questions that I've been trying to answer as we go along, but there's one that is in the answered column. However, I want to circle back to it because it was from an anonymous attendee. And the question was
Hey.
this: what's a good strategy for reducing the impact of stereotype threat? Interesting. I just went, which you, as you were talking, you were almost validating what I wrote, which is your first step is to focus on, that self, right? Focus on yourself, the self-evaluation, that self-understanding, that bias mitigation. But then I said, let's talk to Zakeana for their input as well, because one of the other things you shared, which I thought was brilliant, was, a part of this feedback process of setting a table for, a feedback-rich, feedback-safe environment was having a conversation. What was your own previous lived experience with feedback? And you will hear, especially if they are open and vulnerable, that a lot of folks have had some trauma behind receiving feedback. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that and what you might do, what suggestions you would do to really help with that impact of, mitigating the impact of that stereotype threat.
So I love that you brought this back around to that trauma-informed
Hmm.
lens. It's not about, um, you know, I cut the whole section on trauma-informed leadership because we
Hmm.
were starting to go too long,
Yeah.
but it is important to recognize that there are many factors that influence what we hear and how we hear it. And even an employee acknowledging that I might hear this same feedback differently from a straight white man than I would from a racialized female. Um, and recognizing how I'm listening. So I think part of that stereotype threat is having, to your point, having that conversation of tell me about other experiences you've had with feedback, both positive and negative. So, who was one person who really shaped how you critically thought about yourself, providing you with, some of that tough love, maybe? And what was their approach? Why did you hear that differently? And how can I provide feedback that you could hear that way? What do you need from me to create that type of relationship? How's that?
I love that. Another question. So we've got three open questions right now. The first, again, from an anonymous attendee, how can an employee who works at an organization that is part of a culture that avoids feedback and is resistant to it work to provide feedback in a constructive way, whether that be with colleagues, leaders, etc.?
Yeah. Um, so I have that flippant comment
Mhm.
that I'm thinking, but I think there are opportunities around personal and professional growth that you can raise, even if you share, for example, I'm an employee who recently attended a session. I found it really interesting when we talked about this.
Mhm.
What do you, manager, think about us meeting? Are you open to trying this with me? And, again, trying to shape it as I'm asking you, can you help me? Oftentimes, if people frame it as, Are you able to help me with a I'm having a problem. Can you help me? I read this and I'm struggling to figure out how to apply it in this situation. That's one suggestion. What do you think, Matt?
I love that. And as you're speaking, it really speaks to how we set it up. I always think of like as organizations, we invest in our training on how do you fill out the form? How does a leader fill out the form? But we don't talk about or invest in, when I say we, now this is again a very generalized archetype or stereotype of organizations in North America, but how often do we invest in how do you build up the skill set to not only give feedback, but also receive feedback? Because that's also, there's a couple of questions in
Yeah.
here. One question comes in, how do you introduce 360-degree feedback to Gen Z employees who might not have experienced before? Another question is what's the best way to address an employee taking feedback personally rather than constructively due to employee bias, right? So again, the whole notion of how are we setting up um, the ability to give and more importantly, receive feedback. Again, understanding that, again, there's another question here around, how do we adapt to different cultures? That different cultures might, again, from different perceptual lenses, um, receive and internalize that feedback differently. So that really gets to how are you, as a leader, verifying and validating that the feedback is landing in an actionable way. Beyond just I said it and I wrote it out, there's more to that, right? And there's a lot more that needs to be invested in terms of not only preparing folks to be able to receive feedback, but also I like to think of this as how do you verify and validate that the feedback provided landed in an actionable way. So I don't know if that answers some of the questions that have come in, but I'm seeing a through line in some of these
Mhm.
questions coming in. There's another really great question that I want to certainly, especially on today, which is International Pronouns Day, and I want to thank the individual for sharing this. This individual has shared that I'm a trans woman who's worked at a company for 10 years. I received 3 promotions in the first 5 years as a male and haven't received any as a female. In my
Mhm.
time, there was a woman. However, the organization has nearly tripled in size. How would one approach a conversation with management without being accusatory? Excellent question.
Yeah, that is a tough scenario.
Mhm.
One, because I think you're navigating a space that there's not a lot of information and data on necessarily. And I think if I want to take an approach of wearing my leadership hat, I'm in a situation I've never experienced, so
Mhm.
I don't know how best to address it either. And maybe it comes down to the relationship you have with the individuals through whom you received your promotions. What was it that helped them through that? And what are the roadblocks that the people you're interacting with now? I don't know if it's the same manager or management structure, like where you moved into a different team, for example. Um, while the organization is growing, what are the ways in which it's growing? Because that actually impacts it as well. Is it organic growth? Is it growth through acquisition, which can both help and hinder? Um, so I think there needs to be some context there, but if you can identify what made it possible here and what's making it impossible here, um, that's one opportunity. I think recognizing the likelihood stems from a discomfort at some level and an avoidance behavior of I don't really know how to navigate this space. I'm afraid of either doing or saying the wrong thing, and I don't know how to fix that, probably on both sides. So, um, you know, a cup of coffee and a donut and can we be frank? I had
Mhm.
3 raises in my first 5 years. What are you not seeing that you saw before? And how do I get there?
Again, navigating that crucial
Yeah.
conversation. I love that. Um, a few more questions that have come in. This one, so at an
Probably the
organization,
last question because
okay.
it's
At an organization that did not do a good job of providing action-based and action-focused feedback, I got buy-in for setting up the setup of descriptors at various levels for various identified competencies. Once you do the work, the organization finds it easier to put things in place. Okay, so that wasn't a
yeah,
question. I think that sounds like more of
great.
a statement. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you for
Thank you.
validating.
Thank you. Big cheers.
Okay,
Okay.
we've got
Reid,
an upcoming webinar.
yeah.
We're going to do a couple of small tweaks for our UK audience to get the language more resonating over there. But I'd love to hear your feedback because this is a growth mindset we have here at Diversio EDU. So if you could share your experiences from today and help us do a better job in the future, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time, and I wish you all a great day.